Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Naomi Bindman, a writer, musician, and award-winning educator based in Vermont. Naomi Bindman's articles, essays, and poetry have appeared or are forthcoming in anthologies and journals including Mothering, So to Speak, and Friends Journal, among others. She has received grants from the Vermont Arts Council, taught memoir writing workshops funded by the Vermont Humanities Council, and serves on the faculty of the Vermont State Colleges. Most recently, Naomi has been working on her memoir, You're the Words I Sing, which tells the story of finding a renewed love for life by performing the songs of her daughter, Ellen, who lost her life in a car crash at 17. Thank you for being here, Naomi.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I am excited to talk more about your piece and learn more about you and chat a little bit more about the experiences that led you to writing this. First, I want to start off by just asking you a little bit about your writing experience. It seems like writing and performing has become an outlet for you, and as you've sort of processed all the difficult experiences and emotions that have come with life. So I'm just curious how you got started, what inspires you to keep writing, and if there's any significant moments that you can share with us.
Well, I have to make a distinction because writing I've done all my life, and I consider myself a writer and as well as a teacher, and that's just sort of the air I breathe. Performing is something I started to do after my daughter Ellen died, and it's a craft, it's a skill that I've acquired, but is not my natural element. I was really fortunate to be born into a family of writers, as I say in the piece. My grandmother and my step-grandfather, who I consider my grandfather, were writers professionally. And so in high school, my brothers and I had the benefit of getting, feedback on our work. But that's different from now. Like if you have autocorrect or something, what comes out might or might not be better. Whereas reading my grandmother's suggestions and corrections really helped me understand this is a better way to say it, or this is, too wordy. She wrote in a very flowery style. My grandfather was a mathematician, and it was very terse and declarative. So I benefited from both. Then in college, I went to Dartmouth College for undergraduate, and all students are required to take an writing class. That helped a lot because I thought I was a pretty good writer, and then I learned that I could be a better writer. And then I took an intro education class, which was also another type of writing class. And I feel like that really, really helped me refine my skill as a writer. So I feel like I'm always learning. Over the years, benefited from being in writers groups with other writers. It's always a process of feedback. And at the beginning, for me, and I think for most of us, we feel that what we've created is so precious and so perfect that, we don't want to hear anything, except that it's wonderful. And yet it can always be more wonderful. And having a fresh set of eyes, or a different perspective is so helpful. Even though I don't want to lie, when somebody suggests a change, there's that little moment of resistance. Even, this essay, getting your feedback helped enormously craft it into a better piece. So I have come to embrace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always find that writing the first draft almost flows, but the revision I find personally to be one of the most challenging parts of writing. It really is hard to not hold on to every word that you thought of and let go of the attachment to those words. Yeah.
But for me, it's become a whole different thing. As you said in your intro, I have finished writing the memoir, and now I'm working with a wonderful agent in the process of polishing and preparing for submission to publishers and editors. And that revision process has been just its own joyful, creative thing. So I really encourage people to see them as two separate creative processes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. I don't think I'd ever thought about it like that. I think that also helps, to see it as two different things. And to, there was another writer on the podcast who said, the words don't disappear. She likes them in another file, and they're still there. They're not like into the abyss. I think that's something that sometimes we feel like.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, it's very different from back in the day. Throughout college, I hand wrote all my papers, and then I would edit them on the literal page, and then type them up. And once it was typed, that was it. Now, every draft is saved. So if later I feel like, wait, I really like that piece, let me find it. I could put it back in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's great that you've had different influences to help you become a better writer, from your grandmother to writing groups to professors, and all with different insights. And I think that's a beautiful way of learning to craft your writing, but also all of these people with different lived experience. I feel like that also impacts the way that we grow as writers. I've found immense learning from other people, things that I would have never thought of that people have been able to point out to me. So moving into your essay a little bit, you start off by sharing the tragic passing of your mother. I'm wondering if you can share more about your mom and sort of how she impacted you prior to her death. If there's any special memories that you are particularly fond of.
It's a huge question. I mean, I am who I am because of my mother. I was 13 when she was killed. So I feel like I was pretty formed in all my, my values and my personality by her. She was a progressive activist. One of her former students I interviewed recently, he was a student of hers at Queens College, Felipe Luciano. He's he's had a distinguished career. Among other things, was a member of the Lord's organization. So when we talked, one of the things he said was, you should know your mother was a revolutionary. She wasn't just a radical; she was a revolutionary. So that's very, very impactful and very important to me in who I am, how I live my life. So it's what I'm working on. They're overlapping, but my next book that I have written a draft for with the support of the Vermont Arts Council is about my mother and my memories of her and people's memories of her, and trying to interweave those.
Yeah.
Maybe we can come back to that.
I was going to say, I think it's so incredible that you also became an educator. And so I can see the inspiration from your mother in that sense, and then the writing from your grandmother. You seem to have been surrounded by very strong female role models who were very educated and curious about the world, and just so willing to help other people, is sort of what's coming to mind as I hear about these women.
True. But to be fair, my father is also an educator. Both of my grandfathers were teachers. So it's education and writing are both really important strands. And my brothers are both educators and writers as well.
Yeah, well, that's great. A family of educators and writers. I love it. The next thing I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is you obviously had your own grief that you were dealing with at that moment, but then you swear that your grandmother's grief was so immense. And so I'm just wondering what you remember most vividly about her reactions, and how did that impact your understanding of grief? And to some extent, did you feel like you had to sort of minimize
Mm-hmm.
your expression of your grief because hers was so big in that moment?
It's a really good question, and it's not something that I've really thought about. So that's valuable to me to delve into it. Well, it was a couple of things I think that gave the message of holding it in. Even now, our culture does not deal well with grief. But my mom died in 1975. There were none of the resources that exist now. I would think that if that had happened now, the three children would be given therapy right away.
Yeah.
Grief support groups, as far as I know, didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So we were sort of on our own. And my grandmother was not the only one, but she certainly, had this attitude of carrying on, grieving in private. Although, as I said in the essay, she would start to break down when mom's name would come up. And because of the discomfort, I feel like my brothers and I just sort of backed off and held it in. I also have realized that I took it upon myself as the oldest child to be the protector, the nurturer, the whatever. And somehow that took the form of keeping everybody cheerful, not talking about it. Although I have to say, we didn't go to live with our grandparents immediately. We lived
Okay.
with my dad, my stepmother, and her two children for 2.5 years. And during that time, privately, my brothers and I would talk about our loss and our mom, and sort of hold her close. So we did do that for each other, even though in the outside world we presented whatever face of
Mm-hmm.
holding it together.
I think it's so nice that you and your siblings allowed yourselves the space for that, even um, when it seems like the adults weren't really able to offer that for you, or maybe they didn't even know of resources or that it should be talked about. You know what you can only do what you know in that
Exactly.
moment. But it's good because I was going to ask you, did you grieve with somebody? And it seems like you at least allowed yourself to do that with them, even though you did take on that protector role.
Yes, thank you. That's the word I wanted. Yes, and one other thing I'm remembering now is the summer immediately following her death, I spent with my other grandparents because that plan had already been arranged. And they were very, very nurturing. It's not so much that they talked about her, but they were aware of the trauma that I had been through. And they were just very tender. And every night they would sit with me at my bedside as I fell asleep, and I'd cry, I'd weep, and they would hold my hand. So I think that was also really, really important to have that space, even though it was maybe a month and a half to grieve.
That's important. I know this was a long time ago, but I would even say today we still are not allowing ourselves the space to grieve, or it's people just kind of expect you to get back to it. So even that they were conscious of, okay, let's be considerate of this. That's sometimes rare. People just go, okay, like let's just move on. You don't just move on.
You don't. Our culture is grief illiterate on the one hand, but it's also an aspect of the culture's response to pain, and pain is treated as if it's a bad or a dirty thing, and you're supposed to take a pill or make it disappear. Not go into it, not experience. My experience is it doesn't go away. I'm not sure you even want it to go away. Somebody said to me after my daughter Ellen died, it somebody who had lost her child, it doesn't get better, it gets different. And so I think that's a really good way of framing it. My experience is allowing myself to feel my feelings and lean into the pain is the thing that helps go through the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And ironically, we ask people to move on, not talk about it, not really feel it. And we hope that's just going to solve the problem. But I always find that your body manifests it in one way or another. So it's actually worse to not deal with it. It's going to come out, whether it's through some chronic condition, it's going to come out because you can't just act like something didn't happen or leave a mark on you.
Right. It's right. It's like if somebody lost a limb and
Mm-hmm.
just go ahead and pretend that you still have that leg.
Yeah.
But it's also because people are uncomfortable with other people's pain and they don't know what to say or do. There have literally been people who have crossed the street to not interact because they don't want to feel the upset that my anguish will evoke.
Mm. Yeah. I think we do a very bad job at being uncomfortable. Just in general, it's like not a thing we want. We want it fast, easy. So while we're on the topic, I'm curious, having gone through grief as a teenager and then as an adult, how your understanding of grief has changed, and if you've changed in what you allow yourself to feel or process without the shame or guilt of like taking too long, which that's what happened to me as a teenager when I lost my father. And now as an adult, my understanding has changed. Like, it's okay to feel it. It's going to come unexpectedly. You might be having a great day and it might hit you. My understanding of grief continues to change. I'm just curious if it has changed for you and how.
Yes, all of that is totally true. And I'm sorry I didn't know about your father.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we understand. And that's an interesting thing too, when you find other people who can relate rather than just understand on an intellectual level.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's not that I don't appreciate, I do appreciate people who haven't shared the experience, who try to imagine. Because one of the things people often say is, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And my brother said, after Ellen died, was like, they can imagine, they don't want to imagine.
Yeah.
It's too scary. That said, has evolved. I think as a teenager, I was pretty shut down. I was in survival mode. I was trying to protect my brothers. As far as like being a teen doing normal teenage things, I didn't really do that until we got to our grandparents. I was a junior when we came to live with them. When I went to college, I started to process more what had happened, because there's this thing that you, I think, you get to campus and you're meeting all these people and everybody's sharing their stories. And that, I think, was a time when it was like, oh, yeah, this is actually kind of big.
Mm.
So that might have been the beginning. Ellen's dad died when she was almost 2. He drowned. So that was another sudden, tragic loss. And at that point in my life, on the one hand, I held it together for her, needed to somehow function. But on the other hand, I pretty much withdrew from the world. I was supposed to go back to teaching, and it was like, there's no way. I didn't really want to leave her as a toddler anyhow. And then when he drowned, I was just like, no, going to turn my home into a daycare, and then I could be here. And that way I really didn't have to interact much with the outside world for a long time.
Right.
Um, I feel like that was about 2 years. And then when Ellen's life ended, I refer to my daughter as Ellen and my mom as Mom, and,
Okay.
even though they share the same name. I felt like, I had bounced back. And when Ellen died, I felt like I broke. I wanted only to die. I really did not want to try to figure out how to go on. I wanted to figure out how to end my life. And I really just sat down in the trail for a very, very long time. It was just the only thing I could do was feel what I felt and not pretend that it was anything else for anybody else's needs, because I was done with that. And everything that mattered to me was gone. If, say, my mom was still alive, she would have been 70 then, and I had her support to go through this, and that was my
Right.
first tragic loss, it would have been a different thing. But it just felt like a final straw.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just compounded and it was just so overwhelming. I had something similar when my dad died of cancer when I was a teenager, ignorance being bliss. I was in denial up until it happened. But then once my mother got cancer, I knew very well that actually cancer can lead to death. And now I have a much greater understanding. And I felt like my grief from the initial parents' death hit me. I couldn't even process because this time I had already been through it. So I can understand you're overwhelmed and there isn't really a moment where you're like, I'm gonna allow myself to lean into the pain. It's more like this is all I can even do at this point. I can't function. There's nothing more than I can feel right now. I think it just stacks up. You've been through a lot. I'm curious how long it took of saying, okay, I do want to keep going. This is how I'm going to do it. And I'm sure that is also not linear. I'm sure there's still days where it hits you more than others. So
Absolutely.
how have you learned to navigate all of this loss?
I've written a book about this. Literally. That's basically, sort of the journey. And I guess the irony is that all the things that I was doing during those early years, I was sort of doing so that I could get to a place where I could feel like, okay, I'm done. I've wrapped everything up. I've recorded the rest of Ellen's songs. I had to preserve them, um, because she didn't uh, write musical notation. She played by ear. The first lyrics are just like scribbled literally on a page, and at the top are written the chords. But that was step one, was just trying to get the melodies back for the songs that she had not recorded. And then I was hoping to have somebody who has talent sing them and record them. And then that was not happening. And then through a series of events, a year and a half later, a friend of hers also lost his life in a car crash, who was a musician. And there was a ceremony, a celebration of his life. I ended up singing one of Ellen's songs as part of that. As a result of that, was invited to perform at the Cafe Lena open mic in Saratoga, where Ellen had gone a few times. And my first response was like, no, absolutely not. This was a memorial. I was doing it in Lansley's honor and in Ellen's honor, but I'm not interested in just standing on stage and singing. And then I started to realize that if I want people to hear her music, maybe that's how I have to do it. So it was this gradual process. I didn't have like this long-term goal except for, I want to be done with my life. The irony was that all these things that I thought I was doing to be able to be done living were the things that brought me back to life. and brought me what I thought was impossible,
Yeah.
to feel joy again.
Wow, that's beautiful. As you were sharing that, I was thinking I have wanted from the beginning for people to read their own essays because I think it's so powerful when you can hear from the writer how they intended their words to be
Mm.
said or just the emotion and hear the voice. And I realize that not everybody has the ability to hear. I just think it's so important to even just speak it or put out somewhere, have your name associated with it. But then I think with your experience, I don't even know your daughter. I never met her, but I feel like there's nobody else who could have you sing her words is so beautiful. She can't do it, but now you can. You're giving a voice to her words. You have this essay and a memoir. These women in your life are continuing. Their legacy is continuing. They're sort of continuing with you as you're doing all these things. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So many people now know her through me, through her songs, through my poetry, more recently. So this person who had heard me perform and well, then he watched a video that I made of her last year of high school, and he was like, "It's giving me chills. It's like
Mm.
your voice and her voice, which I don't hear." I think her voice was magnificent. I think, I do the best I can. I have to accept that people hear a similarity. So, but I never thought of it the way you said it. Um, sort of how appropriate it would be for me to be the one. My still long term goal, hope, is that someday, uh, you know, real singers or real singer will
Yeah.
uh, do some of her songs.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure her voice is lovely, but I'm sure the more you're doing it, the better you're getting. I think we're all harsher critics of ourselves than other people. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm doing as much as I can with what I've got.
Yeah. As long as you're enjoying it, which it seems like you are.
Yeah, it does bring solace for sure and
Yeah.
meaning.
That's awesome. I'm actually curious, as you mentioned that you didn't really have an adult that said it's okay to grieve. Let's talk about it. Having lived through that experience, how did you navigate um, your husband dying and then your grandmother dying with Ellen? Did you speak about it openly about grief? Did you put her in therapy or
Right,
give her an outlet to process her feelings, knowing what you had experienced with grief and not being able to do that?
right. I didn't, when she was 2, think about any kind of counseling, but I did explicitly talk about him with her and try to uh, help her hold on to her memories. In retrospect, I realized that as she got older, and life and all the daily pressing concerns took over, he sort of faded from our present. I think I made the mistake of assuming that she would ask me questions and realized only later that I wish I had said, if you have questions about your dad.
Mm.
I wanted to be the place that she came. Her style was to do things when she was ready in so many
Yeah.
ways. So that might have still happened,
Hmm.
had she lived. That it would have sort of been a natural emergence of you know asking questions. I didn't. I did not push it. I did give her a recording. He was also a guitarist and singer,
Mm.
and had written a few songs. And a friend of his had recorded him singing. So I had this, literal tape cassette um, that I gave to her, so she was able to hear his voice.
Nice.
And I know she cherished that. And his guitar became her guitar.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. It's special to have those. little mementos and a way of keeping someone with us, even if they're not there. Yeah, that's so nice. Since we were just talking about your grandmother, you must have had a strong relationship where you then ended up living with her. And I'm curious how that relationship evolved over time.
Yeah. My brothers and I knew that our mother, if anything should happen to her, wanted us to live with our grandparents. The legal system doesn't support that. And there were already tensions and fissures and reasons why my parents divorced in the first place, jealousies and rivalries and so on. So all of that. I know there was a final straw. I don't remember what it was. I remember calling my grandparents with my brothers at some point and saying, please get us out of here. I told them whatever it was that had just happened. Things had really getting stressful. And my grandfather said, write us a letter, we'll go to court. And we landed with our grandparents here in Vermont on the afternoon of December 24th, in time to go cut down a Christmas tree and have Christmas together and start our new lives. So it really was this feeling of having been rescued and being able to feel like I was nurtured again. I can breathe. I can set down some of this responsibility that I've assumed for my brothers. And, now I feel like they're going to be nurtured in a way that wasn't happening. And I don't want to vilify my father or my stepmother. I feel like they were doing the best they could in a very fraught situation. And it was better for them, and it was better for my step siblings that we left as well. My relationship with my grandmother at that point was just like, I admired her. I respected her. It's funny because both of my grandparents lectured around the world. My grandmother was the president of the Melville Society for a while, and so we knew that. But what was important was that she was our grandmother, you know, and she she prioritized us. Her career was very important to her. Her intellect was extremely important. She balanced all of that very well. I was, just so grateful to both of them.
It seems like the greatest title she had was just grandmother, but I'm sure as you were growing up, you were seeing her achieve all those things. Did you feel like she was setting too high of a bar for you, or did you feel like, wow, this woman is so accomplished, I want to be as accomplished as her?
Interesting, good question. I think it's just like um, that's who she was, and there was this expectation that we would all go to college. It's not like a if you go to college, it's a when you go to college. But there wasn't, and I'm grateful for this to my parents, a lot of pressure. In fact, as a young child, I was really, unlike my daughter, burning to learn to read. And they were like, you'll learn to read when you go to first grade. So it was a different thing. School was always my safe space.
Mm.
Yeah, I just loved school. I loved learning. It was easy. It was fun. It was just, as I said before, sort of the air we breathed, an expectation without pressure. I am proud of her, very proud of her. She was a real trailblazer for a woman of her generation. She was born in 1915. Women didn't go to college even, let alone accomplish what she accomplished. Um, and she was a really early civil rights and anti-racist activist, which I think had to do with her teaching early on in a high school called Central Commercial High School in New York City. And I didn't know this until recently when I came across one of her yearbooks. that was a Black school. Also, as a literature person, she became immersed in um, Black literature. That was evolving or expanding field at that time. And then when she got to Guyana, there's a mixture of people of African descent and Indian descent, as well as Native population there. So I'm sure that expanded her awareness uh, quite a bit. That she fused both my mom and my aunt and passed down to us.
Wow, that's great. I'm sure that she would feel very proud to know that she instilled this curiosity in all of you and a desire to grow and achieve things that made you happy. It seems like she left a part of herself for all of you, and I'm sure tried to do the best that she could to do the job that your mom wasn't able to do because she was gone.
Thank you. I do agree. I think she would be proud of the people we've become. And I think that being able to do that was maybe survival. She immersed herself in finishing her book in the first couple of years, in the initial period of grief. I think that might have been a big coping mechanism for her. And then certainly embracing us was a big piece, which is not something that I had when I lost my daughter. The despair would have been as deep, but the feeling of complete loss of identity and meaning and purpose might have been different if I had had a grandchild. So I think that helped her carry on as much as it, was saved the three of us.
Yeah, she had a sense of purpose. You've navigated so many different losses in your life. I'm curious what was the most challenging or has been the most challenging aspect of having to navigate all of this compounded grief.
I think just finding a reason to continue. As I said in the piece, I wish I had understood that no matter how vast mine was, hers was incomprehensible. I don't want to diminish the very real anguish of losing a parent and losing, an incredible parent, and that loss framed who I was for, almost 20 years from the time I lost my mother to the time I became a parent. But when I had my daughter, there was a whole life opened up in such a different way. And it's a different order of magnitude to take nothing away from the heart of my mom's death. There was something I really wanted to say.
A therapist said to me once, because I was navigating like a breakup and my grandmother's passing, and I was like, I don't understand why I'm so overwhelmed by the breakup more than my grandmother's passing. And she was like, well, that relationship was your future. And your grandmother, you have understanding that she's lived this long life. This is just sort of natural progression. I wonder if some of that is also a part of your story. Your daughter had this whole life that you hoped she would live. She was so young, she had this future. Your grandmother was sort of declining, but she had lived a very full life. I think unconsciously we have an understanding of like you grow up, you age, eventually pass, but you want someone to at least have the opportunity to go through all that. And I think with your daughter being so young, I'm sure you had all of these dreams for her that you also had to grieve in addition to her being gone.
Absolutely. And I do want to come right back to that. But
Yeah.
I remembered the little thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to say, which thank you for jogging me out of that moment. The other thing that I realized in grieving my mom is that in 13 years, I got more good stuff, more love, real uh, affirmation and attention and, all sorts of good, good parenting. Then so many people get, a lot of people who are still struggling with the pain of not having been loved, nurtured, or having been
Mhm.
abused. So um, at some point, I think in my late teens, early 20s, I started to recognize that. So it's bittersweet, but that was
Mm.
one little piece that I held. And absolutely yes to what you said about the sort of the natural grieving somebody who dies, in her case, 80s, versus somebody who dies at 17. My mom was 36,
Yeah.
so that's definitely out of time as well.
Yeah.
But yes, I think shifted in terms of all my hopes, dreams, expectations. What I never got to have with my mom, as what I was, imagining and looking forward to, is being adult friends.
Mm.
She was, only 22 years older than me. So now she would be 85. We would have had a friendship um, all those years, and longing for that, but feeling like, okay, I didn't get that, but I did get it with my grandmother for a number of years, and then I'll have it with my daughter,
Mm.
and then I don't have it with my daughter, even though I have found a way to go on
Mm.
and find joy and find meaning. One of the things that really will still rip me open is certain uh, mother daughter
Mm.
interactions. I don't begrudge anybody
Right.
their joy, but sometimes it's just too hard to um, sort of be around.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I was telling someone recently how I've tried for so long to just completely ignore Father's Day as a holiday, but for me, it's easier to just step away because I can't. I am like grateful for other people, but I cannot. It's very triggering. So I think it makes sense. There's just some things that we're just never going to be able to do with our loved ones, and it's triggering. It's very hard. I saw a quote once that said something along the lines of, if there's a death, it's not like you move on there and then there's something different. It's just the aftermath that stays with you. There's no like forgetting it or getting over it. It's just what you were saying earlier about things are different, and maybe you learn to cope with them over time in a better way, but you never fully just stop grieving.
It becomes part of who you are.
Yeah.
That absence is a presence in our lives.
Yes, definitely. I'm just curious how performing your daughter's music has helped you heal, and whether, the experience has changed for you, the early days versus now, how does that experience feel for you when you're on stage performing her music?
It did definitely go through an evolution. So there's the learning curve of um, just remembering the melodies to begin with, and then there was the performing, when every time I stepped on stage was just utter terror. Um, Yet I was finding this unexpected um, community and being embraced by all these other musicians and people who were so kind, sort of wanting to know about Ellen, wanting to know Ellen, through her music, sharing her music. So it was gratifying. I didn't want to embarrass her, so I wanted to do it as well as I was capable of. And so I was trying to learn to play better, trying to learn to sing better. After a while, I took voice lessons, and that helped. And just practice in anything you do. Practice is super important. And I could see that after, say, 6 months, somebody who had seen me at the very beginning saw me and was like, "You've really improved." I also realized that whenever I would progress to a certain level, I'd set the bar higher for myself. I recorded a CD of, I think, 9 more of her songs. So she recorded a dozen, and I've recorded 9 more. And then we had a CD release show for that. And that was maybe the point where I was most comfortable. I had been performing, and performing. There were a few years where almost every night, it didn't matter whether it was a bar or, a listening room or whatever. I was doing small gigs, and then we had this big CD release show at Cafe Lena. It was very exciting. And that was like um, reaching a point where I had gotten into a certain level of ease. I don't think I will ever feel like no problem. On my way to teach a class, I still feel a certain performance anxiety, right? When I was in that flow of performing every single night, stepping on stage was easier. Then there was COVID. But when I started to go sing out again, it was a lot. It wasn't like going back to the very beginning, but I had to overcome um, a lot more anxiety than I had been feeling. It's not my comfort zone. It's always going to be going outside my comfort zone. But
Yeah.
it is the thing that I can do that holds her here for me, for other people, shares her with other people, makes me feel connected to her, lets other people hear her voice, through me in a figurative sense, and her real voice if they listen to her recordings.
Hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. And along those lines of holding her with you, I'm curious if you have any advice for other women or, anyone dealing with grief, whether you would suggest finding an outlet or other things that you've done as you've navigated your grief journey that have particularly helped you, that you would recommend to other people who are trying to figure out how to live with grief and loss in their life.
Right. Well, one thing I've realized is that everybody grieves in their own way. Regardless of what the DSM says, there's no timetable for grief. David Kessler, who's a grief expert, says that the early grief is the first 2 years, um, which is certainly a lot more expansive than the clinical definition, which is, I think, 2 months. But even so, that is a certain timeline. So people do deal in in their own way, in their own time. That's said, I think therapy is a really good and important tool, and connecting with other people who have had similar losses sometimes can be overwhelming, but sometimes can be helpful. Some people go right back to work, not because they have to, but because they need to. And I'm not going to judge that. That wasn't my way. And then people self medicate and do all sorts of stuff. We do what we know. So that wasn't my way of handling problems in the past. So it wasn't going to be my way now. But if that's your go-to, then I understand that. I don't. I think that it helps in the long run. I think it's maybe counterproductive. Whatever avoidance technique people use, um, because the pain is still there, the loss is still there. And then whenever the whatever wears off, it's still right in your face, and it comes back with a vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if I could give advice, I think that there's a lot of discourse now around feeling your feelings and giving yourself permission to grieve, and to feel the pain. Because it's like, what are we afraid of? What's going to happen? What's the worst thing that could happen if you let yourself feel the the horror, anguish, and the sorrow, and you just cry? You're not going to die. The worst has already happened. So acknowledging that pain is not going to make it worse. We have tears for a reason. It's not an accident that there is a healing aspect to to crying, and it's can be cathartic. I hesitate to use the word healing. Feel a, can feel a solace.
Yeah.
The wounds are definitely still there. I would not want to be unaware of them. I don't want to be living in pain constantly. I don't want to pretend, okay, it's all better now. That was a wonderful chapter, and now I've moved on.
You're right.
And then I wanted to say about creativity that we don't have to uh, end up at Carnegie Hall or Med for it to be worthy and worthwhile. Creativity in and of itself is of huge value. So I wish for everybody, whether they're mourning or not, to experience the joy of creativity.
Yeah, you're right. I think that with movies like Inside Out, starting to show kids that it's okay to have all these emotions that coexist. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but in the end, it's really the sadness that is necessary. I think it's so important to start showing kids that, because in some ways, it's hard to teach an adult. I think it's a little bit harder when somebody's been conditioned their whole life to, you hide your feelings, you have to be strong. I think it's hard to let your guard down. I think even if you understand it, and we are all very accepting of, like, yes, you should feel your emotions. And I think we are supportive of people who need to grieve. But I think that we still have a hard time allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with other people. Oh, it's okay to support someone else, but we don't always take that advice. Like what you're saying earlier, I don't want to make this person uncomfortable. So I'm going to keep this to myself. I'll process it in a different way. So I think it's great that you're bringing up creativity, because if you are not in a place where you can speak it out to people, even if you can find your own little creative outlet at home, something to let the pain and the grief out somewhere is just so important. Because in my personal experience, it just is always going to be there. Somehow it's going to come out. It might be a really good starting point for people who aren't ready to share with other people that they're struggling, because I don't think that our society is set up in the best way yet. When people ask you, how are you doing? I think we all still expect that, like, good, okay, fine. Or we're not really ready to hear, not great.
I mean, I've written about this too. There was a long time where I just couldn't answer the question. I would sort of evaluate the situation. If it was like this in the supermarket and the clerk was asking, I realized they're not looking for a response. And I just wouldn't say anything, because to say okay or fine for a real long time just felt like a lie. Now I do that, sort of the social niceties again. But I either didn't respond, or if it was one of my brothers, there were some people I would tell how I was really doing. But a lot of people, I would just say, about the same, or going day by day. I had like scripted a bunch of these stock responses that were at least acknowledging your question, but I'm not fine. I'm really, really not
Yeah.
fine. I heard somebody say recently, a speaker say, vulnerability is a superpower. And I was like, whoa, I love that.
Mm-hmm. It
And
is.
Brene Brown's work around vulnerability, and how that connects to the experience of people who she was calling open-hearted in her research, and living life fully. That though that the capacity or the ability to allow oneself to be vulnerable is also flip side of the same coin of being able to really have joy and beauty. So it's interesting, whether grieving or not grieving. This is my belief system that we get this one lifetime. Maybe we get more. Maybe we get recycled. Maybe there's a greater consciousness. I don't know. But what I do know is that we have this lifetime. And I feel like it's a gift to be treasured, to make the most of the magic of being alive, and to honor the people we've lost. My grandmother, my mother, my daughter. I think that to not squander what we have, that they would want that of us. And we have so much privilege and so much that we take for granted, that we have a responsibility to others, to the earth, to other beings, to do what we can with whatever gifts we've been given.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. You don't know what will happen. So continue celebrating the moments in your life, because you really just never know when our time is up. People have not reached 35. They don't even get to know what it's like to complain or be in your 60s and go, I'm aching or whatever it is, or I've started this new project. And some people don't get to do that. And so I think it's really beautiful what you're saying. We really do just have this one opportunity to enjoy, to grieve, do all the things that we want to do, that we can do, to help others. So I think it's very good advice. As far as I know, too, we don't get to do it all over again. Yeah.
If we do, that'll be great. We'll know it
Yeah.
then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or if we do, we might not even be conscious of it. This is
that's
our
true
second
too.
round. Do it better, right? I think that's really great. And I think it's really beautiful that you have this positive outlook on life, despite everything you've been through, because it can be really hard to still find joy and positivity in things despite everything that you've lost. I think it's incredible everything you're doing.
I feel fortunate that I do have that resiliency that I thought that I had lost, but that I've been able to find again. I'm grateful for that. I think people can be bitter, people can be angry, people can be hateful, because of what life has dealt them. So I guess there is a certain level of choice. Just not sure if it's conscious.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
I'm really grateful to for just the honor of being part of this project, which I think is a terrific gift to the whole community. And on a personal level, opportunity to sort of think deeply about these questions and issues. So thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate you writing your essay, and I'm glad to record this episode. Um, I do feel strongly that the more we talk openly about grief and share stories like this, my hope is that this will help someone else process, and that the more we talk about it openly as just part of life, that I will come to terms with the fact that we're all going to die, that we'll talk about it more. Sometimes we are in denial about it. We don't talk about it. We don't say the things we want to say to people before they go because we're thinking there's forever. And then when they do go, we don't allow ourselves to grieve properly because we're convinced we're not supposed to do it a certain way. As more people hear stories like yours, they'll feel comfortable taking it at their pace, doing whatever they need to do to grieve in their own way. So thank you so much, Naomi.